back with another one. It's been a while, as you guys can see. I've been busy or whatnot. For everyone that knows me, that really talk to me on a day-to-day basis. I had said I was going to retire by 40. I turned 40 this year, so I had pretty much said I was retired for like the last few months of 2025. So the podcast is something I was doing to keep myself occupied, but I got back into the groove of things here recently with some good people or whatnot, and I'm back in the industry. So for everyone that watches from the industry, I'll be seeing you soon. But today's episode is gonna be titled "I Stopped Lying to Myself." And that's why I left Christianity, or any religion for that fact. So the question is, CJ, what finally made you leave Christianity? This is what it really came down to. See, I got tired of pretending I was convinced when I wasn't. Hell, I got tired of calling confusion faith and calling fear wisdom. Shit, I even got tired of acting like honest questions was somehow a character flaw. And to top it off, I got tired of watching people treat certainty like it was a virtue, even when that certainty was built on foundation, emotion, and reputation instead of evidence. And for a long time, I did what a lot of people do. I simply inherited a framework before I even examined it. I was handed language before I even understood it. I was given conclusions before I even knew what the questions really were. And when you are raised around belief, or surrounded by belief, or emotionally shaped by belief, it can feel like you are thinking for yourself when you really are just defending what was put in your head early. That does not mean every believer is dishonest, and it does not mean that every Christian is foolish. It does not mean there is no value in Christian community, music, ritual, or moral teaching. But what it does mean is being familiar is not proof. Reputation is not proof. Passion is not proof. A book being meaningful is not proof. A belief changing your life is not proof. And a whole culture agreeing with something is still not proof. At some point, I had to ask myself a question that cut deeper than any of the debates. Not do I like Christianity, not does Christianity comfort me, not does Christianity help some people, not even is Christianity useful. The real question was this: do I actually believe this is true? Or is it because I was taught to protect it? That question changed everything, because once I stopped trying to defend Christianity and start trying to examine it, the whole structure started shaking. And once I stopped lying to myself about that, I couldn't go back. See, I didn't leave Christianity because I love sin. I left because I love truth more than the comfort of pretending. So let me say this clearly. I didn't wake up one morning and decide, you know what? I'm done with Christianity. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't just one argument. It wasn't just one debate. It wasn't just one bad church experience, or it wasn't a hypocritical believer, not one tragedy. It was layers. It was years of noticing things and being told not to notice them too hard. It was years of hearing answers that sounded powerful in church but fell apart under real scrutiny. Years of being told to call unsolved contradictions a mystery. Years of watching people mistake confidence for truth. Years of hearing Christians say things like, "You just got to have faith, CJ." As if faith is a shortcut around evidence every time. And the deeper I looked, the more I realized something, y'all. A lot of religious belief survives not because it answers questions well, but because people are trained not to ask certain questions honestly. When I found that out, that was huge for me. Because once you realize a system has emotional penalties for no doubt and social penalties for questioning and moral shame attached to skepticism, you start to understand that this is not just about ideas. It's about control. Not always evil control, though. Not always intentional control. But control all the same. If every hard question gets turned into a personal flaw in the questioner, then the belief system is protected before the conversation even starts. Think about how people say things like, "You just want to sin," or "You want to be your own God." Man, I didn't even heard that one, which is crazy. You leaning on your own understanding, you're spiritually blind, or your heart is hardened and you're deceived by the devil. Man, those are not arguments. Those are shields that people put up. To me, that is not how a system protects itself from examination. And when I began to notice that, something clicked. I realized I was being asked to treat doubt as danger instead of what it really is. A normal response to weak evidence and unconvincing claims. That mattered a lot, because doubt is not always rebellion. I had to find that out. And sometimes doubt is honest. Sometimes doubt is your mind refusing to fake certainty. Sometimes doubt is what happens when your integrity starts to wake up. For me, the conversation started there. Not in hate, not in bitterness, but more in honesty. I stopped forcing myself to say I knew things that I didn't know. I stopped forcing myself to act like apologetics solved more than they actually solved. My homeboy can tell you this. I stopped pretending that I feel God was the same thing as evidence. I stopped pretending ancient claims should get a free pass just because they were sacred to somebody. And once you start being honest at that level, the house starts coming down brick by brick, layer by layer. Not because you are trying to destroy it, but because you are finally checking whether it was built strong in the first place. See, my deconstruction did not begin with rebellion. It began the moment I stopped calling my unanswered questions a lack of faith and start calling them what they really were, just unanswered questions. One of the things that helped me the most, honestly, was philosophy. Not in some elite, abstract, hard to follow way. I mean philosophy in the most basic sense. You know, learning how to think clearly, how to define terms, learning how not to be impressed by emotional language, learning how to ask what follows from what, learning how to tell the difference between a claim, an argument, and even proof. See, that changed a lot for me. A lot. Because once I started thinking with a philosophical mind, I noticed how much religious conversation is built on assumptions people never actually stop to examine. For example, people say everything has to come somewhere. So God, from somewhere. So God did it. But that ain't a conclusion. That's a jump. Even if everything has a cause, that does not automatically get you to the Christian God. It doesn't get you to Yahweh. It doesn't get you to Jesus. It doesn't get you to the Bible. And it sure doesn't get you to heaven, hell, sin, salvation, or even resurrection. That is one of the biggest things philosophy helped me see. People often act like a broad question somehow proves their specific religion. And it don't. At most, it opens a discussion. It does not close one, though. Then there's morality. You know, people say without God, there's no morality. But morality existed in human communities long before most people ever heard of Christians and their theology. Human beings had to cooperate, raise children, punish harm, reward fairness, and build trust long before formal Christian doctrine. Morality is not a Christian invention, people. It is a human necessity, in my opinion. And once you see it that way, the claim that morality depends on Christianity, it starts looking real weak. Then they'll say, well, there's meaning. You know, people say without God, life has no meaning. But meaning is something I think It don't just drop out the sky. Meaning is something, it's not something that just drops out the sky. Meaning is something conscious creatures build, experience, and even protect. Think about it. Love has meaning because we feel it. Grief has meaning because the loss is real. Justice has meaning because suffering is real. Beauty has meaning because human minds can encounter it. The idea that life is meaningless without someone cosmic signing off on it never made sense to me. Especially once I really sat with it and thought about it. That sounds less like a discovery and more like dependency. And then philosophy helped me see something. Just because a belief answers a philosophical need doesn't make it true. That was the big one. That was the icing on the cake, because Christianity answered a lot of my needs. It answered the fear of death. It answered fear of injustice, fear of randomness, fear of loneliness, fear that suffering has no purpose, a fear that people who hurt us might get away with it. It answers fear that our lives are too small to me. I understand why that is powerful. I really do. I believed in it for so long. But once I understood that power ain't proof and comfort ain't proof, and a belief being emotionally useful says something about itself, about whether the belief is actually true. That was a hard thing to admit, because sometimes what helps you survive is not what helps you know. And philosophy kept pushing me back to that point. What is the claim? What is the evidence? Does the conclusion actually follow? What assumptions are being smuggled in here? What would you say if another religion used the same argument? Those questions did a lot of work on me, for me. Because once I started applying that same standard to Christianity that Christians apply to the other religions, the special treatment began to fade away. It started disappearing. And when the special treatment disappears, a lot of religion starts looking a lot less like revelation and a lot more like human storytelling protected by their doctrine and tradition. See, philosophy did not destroy my faith. It just stopped letting my faith grade its own damn homework. And this is where things really started to open up, especially for me. Religious history. Once I started studying religious history, Christianity stopped looking like this isolated, untouched beam of divine light dropped straight out of heaven. It started looking like what all the other religions look like when you study them historically. I mean, how they develop, how they're layered, how they're edited, how they're interpreted, how they're debated, how they are shaped by culture, shaped by politics, shaped by power, shaped by human beings, carrying it through time. Bro, now, that doesn't automatically make it false, but it absolutely destroys the illusion that it floated above history untouched. And once that illusion broke, I just couldn't unsee it. I started noticing how many ideas Christians talk about as timeless were actually developed over time, not just explained over time. I mean, how they developed, how they were to refine things that were argued about, sometimes fully transformed. That matters because people often present Christianity as if every major doctrine was obvious from day one. That it just is I'm getting frustrated here because that's just not how history works. Canaan took time, creeds took time, doctrines took time, arguments over Jesus' nature took time, arguments over salvation took time, arguments over authority took time, arguments over scripture itself took time. Human beings debated all of this. They did not just open a divine package with perfect clarity. And when I saw that, it became harder to keep pretending Christianity was this clean, untouched revelation preserved outside of normal history. Then I started looking at the Bible, not just devotionally, but historically. Boy. That's where I got some of my favorite books from. Once I started looking at the Bible that way, boy, that changed everything. Because when you read the Bible as a believer, trying to be fed, you read it one way. When you read it as a historical collection shaped across time, you read it another way. And you start seeing multiple voices, shit like multiple agendas and different contexts and different theologies and different priorities. You start noticing that these texts came from real communities with real pressures and real political worlds, real enemies and real fears and even real hopes. And suddenly the Bible starts looking less like a seamless supernatural monologue and more like a library of ancient human religious literature. Again, let me say this again. That does not automatically make it worthless. But to me, that changes the category of where the Bible is. You got to put it in the right place. That changes a lot. Then think about it. There is the bigger ancient world. That was huge for me. Because Christianity don't exist in a vacuum. Judaism didn't exist in a vacuum. And ancient Israel didn't exist in a vacuum. These traditions grew in a region full of God's myths and rituals and kings and empires and war narratives and temple systems and purity codes and flood stories and law codes, cosmic battles and sacrificial ideals and even divine claims. And once you start comparing, patterns start to appear. Not always one-to-one copies. I mean, because that's just too simple. But patterns absolutely appear. And those patterns matter because when ideas show up across cultures, the question becomes, are we looking at a unique revelation or are we looking at normal human religious development in the ancient world? That question haunted me for almost 2 years, y'all. Because the more I learned, the more Christianity looked less unique in kind and more unique in the way believers framed it to be. And that was a big difference. I also started paying attention to how religion and empires work together. That is another major historical lens. People don't just spread beliefs because they true. They spread through families, through institutions, through conquest, through law, through education, through social pressure, through identity, through power. Christianity is not just a set of ideas people calmly examine in a neutral marketplace of truth. It was carried by history. And we know history is toxic, super messy. So when Christians act like the size and survival of Christianity proves divine backing, I can't just ignore the role of empire and colonization and inheritance and cultural dominance that I know about. History will not let me simplify it that way anymore for y'all. And once history starts talking, dogma starts to sound a lot less certain. Religious history did not make Christianity look more divine to me. It just made it look more human. Now, let's talk about theology. Because for a while I thought theology was where Christianity became deepest. And in one sense, it does. But it also becomes more exposed right there. Because theology often sounds strongest because you press it hard. Once I started examining Christian theology, I noticed how often it survives by using big words, emotional forces, and internal consistency without actually solving the real problems. Take sin, for example. Sin is central to Christianity, but what exactly is it? Is it moral failure? Is it rebellion? Is it corruption? Is it inherited guilt? Is it condition? Is it an action? Different Christians answer that in different ways. And the more they explain it, the more slippery it gets. Then they talk about salvation. Saved from what exactly? From hell? From sin? From separation from God? From God's own justice? That one always struck me. The system often sounds like this, though. God created the rules, humans failed the rules, God punishes the failure. Then God offers himself as a solution to the punishment built into the system he made. And believers call that perfect love. All right. I know that sounds blunt, but that is that is what it started sounding like to me. Not beautiful, not just, not divine, circular. The idea that an innocent person being killed somehow fixes guilt for the guilty. That might sound meaningful inside the system once you're trained in it, but step outside of it for a second. Does punishing the innocents in place of the guilty really sound like the highest morality imaginable? Or does it sound like an old sacrificial logic people have learned to call beautiful because they grew up with it? See, that question mattered to me. And then there's hell. Let's be honest. Hell alone causes many people to fake belief. Not because they are convinced, but because they terrified. And a belief system that says, believe this or risk eternal punishment is not just offering truth to me. In my opinion, is more like applying pressure. A lot of pressure at that. And once I admitted that to myself, I had to ask another hard question. How much of what people call faith is actually fear management? How much of devotion is sincere conviction? And how much of it is, I don't want to be wrong if hell is real? That is not a small question. It's actually a big one. And then there's prayer. Christians speak about prayer as if it is evidence of relationship. But prayer looks exactly like what you would expect from human beings talking into uncertainty and then interpreting life through hope, coincidence, memory, and selective attention. Prayers that seem answered are highlighted. Prayers that go unanswered are spiritualized. If the answer is yes, God is good, and if the answer is no, God is wise, if the answer is silence, God is mysterious, that is not a testable system, in my opinion. That is a system that can fail because every outcome gets absorbed into the same conclusion. That is theology protecting itself again. And then the problem of evil. This one never really went away. Never. No matter how polished the explanation sounded, the problem stayed. Free will does not solve natural disasters. Free will does not solve cancer in children. Free will does not solve parasites, deformities, and earthquakes and famine, or random stuff. And even when free will does explain human cruelty, it still leaves the question of divine silence. If God intervenes sometimes, why not there? If God can act, why not then? If he loves, why that type of silence? I got tired of hearing people call these questions prideful. Those are not prideful questions. Those are human questions. And to me, they're serious questions. And weak answers wrapped in holy language stop satisfying me. Theology did not fall apart for me because I was shallow. It fell apart because I finally looked at it without kneeling first. And anthropology was another major turning point for me because anthropology helps see religion as a human phenomenon, not just your religion. Religion across cultures, across time, and across continents, and across totally different peoples with different languages and different environments and different myths and different sacred stories. And once you start looking at religion from an anthropological standpoint, something snaps and something happens. You stop treating your inherited belief as if it appeared in a vacuum, honestly. You start seeing patterns in human behavior. You start seeing how people create meaning, how they create order, how they use stories to explain suffering, how they use rituals to create belonging, and how they use sacred language to strengthen their identity. You can even see how they divide the pure from the impure and how they define insiders and outsiders. Truly, how they build systems that regulate sex, food, death, family, authority, and morality. And once I realized that last piece I just discussed, that was huge for me because Christianity started looking less like the exception and more like one example of a very human process. Again, that does not automatically prove it's false, but it changes the starting point to me. And a lot of what believers call revelation can also be understood as pattern making and community building and meaning making. And human beings are very, very, very good at that. They are storytelling creatures. They are social creatures, symbolic creatures that attach meaning to things, turn things into rituals, preserve narratives, pass identity through stories. This is what humans do. And religion fits that pattern quite beautifully. And see, anthropology also helped me understand why belief feels so real to people inside of it. And that was important because I don't think every believer is faking. Most are not. I had this conversation with my wife last night. People really do experience religion deeply, but human experience is not a clean proof machine. People in many religions have visions. Many religions have answered prayers. Many religions have sacred feelings. Many religions have testimonies. And many religions have miracles claimed by sincere people. So the existence of powerful religious experience does not prove one religion true. It proves human beings can have powerful religious experience. And that is a very different claim. And anthropology helped me separate those two things. Then I started noticing how much religion is tied to identity, family identity, cultural identity, national identity, moral identity, and even personal identity. For many people, losing religion does not just feel like changing a conclusion. It feels like betrayal of your people. This is why these conversations get so heated, in my opinion, because often you are not just questioning a doctrine. You are touching a whole web of belonging. And once I understood that, I became even more careful with myself, because I had to ask, am I defending what is true or what feels like home? And that was a scary ass question, but it was a necessary one. And anthropology kept pulling me back to earth, back to the human level, back to how beliefs function in actual communities, back to how myth shapes behavior, back to how authority is preserved, back to how sacred stories just how they justify power, structure, time, and organize family life, and even make suffering feel narratable. All of that made religion more understandable to me. But it also made it less supernatural, because the more natural explanations you have for religious power, the less you need to assume divine origin to explain why it grips people so deeply. See, anthropology did not make religion meaningless. It made religion understandable, and once it became understandable, it stopped looking untouchable. And let me get into a lane that people love to misuse: physics, cosmology, and astrophysics. A lot of believers talk like science points straight to God. I get why. The universe is huge. It's beautiful, strange, elegant, sometimes terrifying. Sometimes it is awe-inspiring. And when people feel awe, they often reach for God language. I understand that. I really do. But your awe ain't evidence. And wonder is not a shortcut to theology. And the universe being amazing does not prove Christianity. The universe being hard to explain does not prove Genesis. The universe being finely structured does not prove Jesus rose from the dead. That is a big leap, people. And I think a lot of people make it emotionally, not logically. Studying physics and astrophysics did not make me think, wow, therefore Christianity. It made me think reality is far more complex than old religious people imagine. It humbled me, not toward ancient scripture, toward the scale of what we do not know. And humility matters, because religious certainty often rushes in where real intellectual humility should slow us down. The cosmos does not read like a Sunday sermon. It reads like a vast, indifferent, unfolding reality that human beings are trying to understand with limited tools and small lifespans. Stars explode, galaxies collide, worlds form and vanish, black holes bend space time. Time itself behaves in ways that break everyday intuition. None of that sounds like ancient people had a privileged handle on reality. It sounds like human beings have always been trying to explain what they barely understood. And that includes religion. Now, does science explain everything? No, of course not. But science does not explain everything, is not the same as therefore a religion is true and I can sit God and Jesus there. Boop. No, you cannot do that. A gap is where a lot of bad apologetics live. Another thing science gave me was respect for methods that can correct themselves. And to me, that is big. Science can be wrong, yes, but science has built-in correction. Test, revise, recheck, challenge, refine. Religion often does the opposite. Protect, excuse, reinterpret it, spiritualize. That difference matters. One system expects correction, the other often fears it. And then there is the human tendency to insert God wherever uncertainty remains. That used to sound powerful to me. Now it just sounds lazy because history is full of things once attributed to gods that later turned out to have natural explanations. So every time someone says science can't explain this, therefore God, I hear an argument that has aged badly many times before. And then there is this deeper point. The universe does not seem built around us in the way many religions, stories assume it is. We are not sitting at the obvious center of a small, tidy creation story. I ain't thought about that. We're on one planet around one star among an absurd number of stars in one galaxy among absurd numbers of galaxies. Now, that doesn't disprove God, but it absolutely challenges the old human-centered confidence many traditions were built on, that are still built on today. And I had to be honest about that too. Physics did not make me arrogant. It made me smaller. It made me be cautious about ancient certainty, because the more we learn about reality, the less impressive religious overconfidence becomes. See, the cosmos did not preach Christianity to me. It taught me how small human certainty really is. Now, let me be real about something. Leaving Christianity is not just intellectual. It's emotional too. Deeply emotional. Because even when the argument stopped convincing you, the emotional wiring can still be there. The fear can still be there. Habit can still be there. Guilt can still be there. The voice in your head can still be there. And it sounds something like this. Well, what if I'm wrong? What if hell is real? What if God is offended? What if doubt is rebellion? And what if I'm hardening my heart? A lot of people don't understand that deconstruction can feel like grief because you are not just leaving ideas, people. You are leaving a whole emotional map, a whole vocabulary, a whole way of framing pain and hope and identity and purpose and death. This is not light. It can feel like losing a language you used to fit in or think in. And there were moments where I had to really ask myself, am I holding on because I'm convinced or because I'm scared? That question was brutal because fear can dress itself up as faith for a long time, a very long time. And if a belief stays in place mainly because you're afraid of the consequences of doubting it, then you have to ask whether the belief is really being free. That mattered to me because truth does not need terror to survive. Truth should not need threats. Truth should not need eternal punishment hanging over every honest question. And that was one of the emotional breaking points for me. I realized so much of Christian certainty around me was not calm confidence rooted in evidence. It was emotional dependence, social reinforcement, and fear of what happens if you let the whole thing go. And again, I did not say that cruelly. I say that because I had to face it in myself too. I had to admit that some things I once called the Holy Spirit convincing me may have just been conditioning. Sometimes I call peace may have just been relief. Some things I call spiritual warfare may have just been my cognitive dissonance. Some things I call certainty may have just been reputation. That doesn't mean every spiritual experience is fake. It means human psychology is powerful and I can no longer treat intense feelings as automatic proof of supernatural truth. And that was one of my hardest parts, y'all. Because once you stop romancing your inner experiences, you lose one of the biggest emotional crutches religion gives you. But you also gain something: honesty. And I would rather have honest uncertainty than a rehearsed certainty I have to keep emotionally defending from collapse. See, leaving Christianity was not just losing beliefs. It was learning not to confuse fear, habit, and emotion with truth. Now, let me deal with one of the laziest lines believers use. You left because you wanted to sin. That one gets thrown around so much because it's so convenient for y'all. It turns a disagreement about truth into a flaw in character. It saves the believer from having to deal with the actual reasons someone left. And it is deeply dishonest. I didn't leave Christianity because I wanted to sin. I left because I stopped being convinced that Christianity was true. And those not the same thing. And honestly, this accusation says more about the accuser than the person leaving, because it reveals a really shallow understanding of human motivation, in my opinion. Not everyone questioning religion is trying to party hard. Not everyone doubting doctrine is chasing vice. Some people are just being intellectually honest. Some people care whether what they believe lines up with reality. Some people are tired of calling weak arguments deep just because they come from a pulpit. Some people are tired of pretending. And let's flip the question for a second. Even if I wanted more freedom in my life, that still would not tell you whether Christianity was true. Motives do not prove doctrine. A person could leave for bad reasons and Christianity will still be false. A person could stay for good reason and Christianity still be false. Truth is not settled by that kind of stuff, to me. That's another thing that I had to learn, though. People love attacking motive when they cannot answer substance. And religion does that constantly. You're angry at God. You're broken. You just want to sin. You had bad church experiences. You were never really saved. All of that is a way to avoid the actual issue, which is this. Is it true? That is the question. Not whether leaving makes people uncomfortable. Not whether doubt hurts someone's feelings. Not whether unbelief sounds arrogant to believers. Is it true? And once I kept coming back to that question, the "you just want to sin" accusation started sounding more like what reality is, a coping mechanism. Because for some believers, it is easier to imagine that non-believers are morally corrupt than it is to face the possibility that someone imagined the same claims and simply find them unconvincing. That is the real issue. I didn't leave because I wanted less morality. I left because I wanted more honesty. I wanted to stop saying I knew when I didn't fucking know. I wanted to stop pretending faith was stronger than the actual evidence. I wanted to stop acting like inherited dogma was the same thing as earned conviction. That is not a moral collapse. That is intellectual self-respect, if you ask me. I didn't leave Christianity to sin in peace. I left because I could not keep pretending in public and calling it faith in private. I just got tired of it. And a lot of people want to rush to this topic. Well, CJ, what do you believe in now? What do you believe in? And I get it. People want categories. They want labels like atheist, agnostic, skeptic, deist, spiritual, materialist, humanist, whatever. Those labels can be useful. But honestly, for this episode, that is not even the main point. The main point is why I left. Because leaving Christianity did not require me to have every answer. That is another trap religion sets. It says, if you cannot explain everything, then come back to us. No, I do not need total knowledge to reject bad arguments. I don't need a complete replacement worldview before I can stop pretending yours convinced me. I don't need to solve every mystery in the universe before I can say Christianity didn't earn my trust. That is not how reasoning works, people. I can say I don't know, honestly. And to me, that is healthier, or that's really a healthier sentence than false certainty. I'd rather say I don't know what happens after death than pretend I know because of an ancient text and its claims. I'd rather say I don't know why reality exists than leap from mystery to dogma. I would rather say I don't know the full story of consciousness, morality, meaning, and or the cosmos than force a religious answer on top of those questions just because the unknown makes people anxious and jittery. That is one of the biggest changes in me. I became more comfortable with uncertainty. Not because uncertainty is fun, but because honesty matters more than comfort. And once I accepted that, I felt freer. Not free in a shallow sense, though. Not now I can do whatever I want sense, y'all. Free in the sense that I no longer had to defend a system I was no longer convinced by. You know, freedom in the sense that I could let questions stay open when they were actually open. Free in the sense that I no longer had to act like Dot was evil or the devil. Free in the sense that I could think without asking permission from God first. This is freedom to me. Not rebellion, not chaos, not arrogance. Just freedom from forced certainty. And that freedom costs something. It cost me relationships. It cost me belonging to my family. It cost emotional comfort. It can cost the illusion that somebody upstairs is micromanaging justice. But I would still rather live honestly inside unanswered questions than dishonestly inside borrowed answers. I do not need a religion to justify leaving the old one. I just needed the courage to stop faking certainty. And this is what you got. So, let me bring it all together. Why did I leave Christianity? I left because philosophy taught me not to confuse claims with proof. That's one. I left because religious history showed me that Christianity developed like human religion develops. That was two. I left because theology kept asking me to call contradictions and fear and moral tension mystery. That was three. I left because anthropology showed me that religion makes deep human sense without needing it to be supernatural. That was four. I left because physics and astrophysics expanded my sense of reality while shrinking my respect for ancient overconfidence. That was five. I left because I got honest about the emotional machinery of faith. I left because I stopped confusing fear with relevance. I left because I stopped giving Christianity a free pass I would never give any other religion. I left because I finally examined the system instead of defending it. And it stopped looking divine and started looking man-made. And most importantly, I left because I stopped lying to myself. That is the core of it. I stopped lying and saying the evidence was stronger than it was. I stopped lying and saying my doubts were just temptation. I stopped lying and saying that the Bible felt different in a way that proved anything. I stopped lying and saying emotional experiences were enough. I stopped lying and saying that unanswered questions were answered. I stopped lying and saying fear of hell was the same thing as conviction. I stopped lying and saying old claims should be trusted just because they were old. And I stopped lying and saying that certainty was holy when it wasn't. A lot of the time, certainty was just inherited confidence, protected from scrutiny. So once I saw that, I couldn't keep pretending. So if someone asks me now why I left Christianity, I don't need to hide behind 10 complicated layers. I can just say it plainly. I left because I finally cared more about what was true than what was comforting. I left because I would rather stand in honest doubt than kneel in dishonest certainty. I left because I would rather say I don't know than pretend I know and make other people comfortable. I left because reality matters more to me than tradition. I left because intellectual honesty matters more to me than belonging. I left because my conscience would not let me keep performing conviction I no longer had. I left because once I stopped lying to myself, Christianity could not survive that level of honesty in me. I did not lose faith. I lost my willingness to protect the story that no longer felt true once I looked at it with an honest lens. So no, I do not see my story as a fall. I actually see it as a confrontation with fear, a confrontation with tradition, with inherited certainty, with the pressure to perform belief. A confrontation with my own desire for easy answers. And I think a lot of people are in the same place right now. And even if they don't say it out loud, it's still there. A lot of people are not convinced, but they are still performing conviction. A lot of people are not at peace, but they are calling it faithfulness. And a lot of people have real questions, but they are too afraid to let those questions breathe. And a lot of people are scared that if they stop repeating the script, the whole thing might collapse. And maybe it will. But if it collapses under honest examination, then the problem was never your honesty. The problem was the structure. And I'm not telling anyone what they have to believe, but I am saying, be honest. If you believe, know why. If you doubt, admit it. And if you're unconvinced, then say that. And if you don't know, say that too. But don't lie to yourself just because the truth might cost you your community, comfort, or certainty. That cost is real. But so is freedom. And for me, freedom started the day I stopped dressing up my little doubt as sin and started carrying it honestly. So that's why I left Christianity. Not because I hated God, not because I loved sin, not because I wanted to be my own God, not because I was broken, not because I was deceived. I left because I stopped lying to myself. And once I did that, I could finally hear my own mind clearly. And it was telling me what I had been avoiding for a long time. I don't believe this is true. And I was done pretending otherwise. I stopped lying to myself. And Christianity could not survive the truth of that. And remember, no fear, no dogma, just clarity. I'm your guy, CJ Everson. I am the Jewish Skeptic. Thanks for watching.
Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know.